Hello and welcome to Friends and Authors Live. I'm Rosa Linda here with my good friend, A.K. Vias, also known as Aash. We are two indie authors, multi-published, Aash much more published than I am, but we write and we publish our books, and then we talk about our journeys here on this show every week. And this week, Aash, I'm in Tucson, Arizona. So hopefully my internet in the hotel will hold up, because that's always the theme here. Where are you? Is your internet playing along? I think so far, knock wood. I haven't had it digitized yet. So hello, good morning for me and good evening for you.
Hello there. Hello there. It's there's a rainstorm going on right now. So it's kind of like more dramatic than I would have thought.
Well, and it's nice for you because it finally cooled off, because you guys had heat wave after heat wave, right?
It's been a crazy summer for Europe because they don't really believe in air conditioning philosophically in France and Germany for the most part. And, it's been hot. So
it's so funny because now I'm being here, we're delivering my daughter back to college, and being here in Arizona, I'm reminded of the heat. It's 108 degrees here. And I was thinking about you this morning being over there in Germany, because when you guys had the heat, have real heat, you have very little few places have air conditioning. Here, it's the opposite. You go from outside where you're on the surface of the sun to inside where you're like in the frozen Arctic tundra, because everybody loves their air conditioning here. So I'm sitting here inside and freezing, but if I change the temperature, my husband will be like, oh, it's too hot. So he loves his air conditioning, and he grew up here. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the way it is. My best friend, he and his family, they have young kids too, were in London for the week, which had the heat wave. And he wrote to me on WhatsApp saying, okay, now I understand what you're talking about. He's like, in the States, obviously, we take air conditioning for granted. We're like, okay, it's hot out. Who cares? Just your cars are air conditioned, your house is air conditioned, stores are air conditioned, the schools are air conditioned, right? That's really not the case, at least in Europe for now.
Yeah. And it makes me think that's, I always thought it was funny because, as you know, we split our time sometimes between living in New Mexico and living on a boat. Well, we have the last 2 years we've been in the Med. And I always thought it was so strange that people just like all of Europe takes off for like a month in like late July, August, right? Or different times. But I never understood it, but now, based on what you're saying, I'm like, it totally makes sense. Because if it was that hot and you have no respite and you can't take a break, I think I would probably want to take a vacation and not be able to work, because you don't function as well when it's so hot. And I love the heat, but there's a point where it's just it's crushing and you can't really think.
Yeah, well, it's a confluence of things, because it gets very cold here too. So the houses are really, really insulated. Right. So, it's thick houses and no air conditioning. Right. But the biggest difference has been it usually cools off at night, but they call it tropical nights, where the temperature actually stays above 90 at 2 a.m. So it doesn't cool off. That's the issue.
Yeah.
That has been. So,
yeah. And
anyway,
in the desert, it actually gets really cold at night, even when it's 108, like it was last night. As soon as the sun goes down, it just cools off completely. So you actually can sleep even if you don't have air conditioning. So yeah, just different climates. Right. It's but the good news is we have internet and we should be good. So I wanted to share a little bit about last night. I have a friend who lives here in Arizona, and she approached me after I released my first book last year and said, oh, we're thinking about picking your book for our book club. And I was like, oh, okay. And then like almost a year went by, and I knew that she had been talking about it, but I'm like, I forgot and didn't really think about it. Well, she reached out to me a few months ago and said, okay, your book's coming up. And I was like, oh, I thought you just decided not to, since I hadn't heard. She goes, oh no, we pick our books a year in advance. And then they, slot it and they each month what they're going to read, and then they get together and have a conversation about books. So they actually picked my book, Death Moon, as their August book, and they timed it so that I could actually be here because they knew I was going to be delivering my daughter back to college. They timed it so that I could physically be here with them and at their meeting as they discussed my book. So that happened last night. And if you don't mind, I'd love to share the experience.
That's great. No, that sounds awesome. I congratulations. I mean, it's nice that you have, such thoughtful friends who would time it the way they did. It's always exciting when your book is in a book club.
Well, and I'd never had that experience. I actually, with my sailing memoir, I had my cousin's mom, so by marriage, her mom's book club. We did a Zoom call where we talked about the sailing memoir, and that was super sweet and nice. But something about your fiction, like I've had a lot, because I'm, earlier in my career than you are, I've had wonderful friends and family tell me they read my book and they say, oh, I loved it, or I liked it, or whatever they say. But I think I realized last night it landed differently for me than having people who don't know me sit down with me, and they had written out very thoughtful questions. They shared critiques. It was very different than, I think in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's my friend that's saying that, or that's my family member, that my mom is going to like my books, but having these strangers who really are prolific readers. They told me they recently read War and Peace. I'm like, they go through a wide range of genres, a wide variety of books. To have them sit down and thoughtfully share their opinions and questions and critiques with me about my book was really a cool experience.
Well, it's actually very valuable on multiple levels. I mean, it is the cool experience, but it's also, from a marketing and content perspective, very valuable, because when you're starting out and you write a book, it's daunting and you're excited to have the book written, and all your friends and family are excited. They turn out to be, from everyone, a big chunk of the big reviews. But for the most part, there may not be representative of your target demographic, right? My friends and family, some of them are, but most of them aren't. And those reviews on Amazon can give the algorithm a very different idea of the kind of people it should be trying to reach with your book, right? So these ladies you talked about who, aren't necessarily close friends and family, but are, just avid readers, their feedback is very valuable, A, in general, and B, from an Amazon perspective, like those the kind of reviews you want, because if those ladies liked your book, then you have an idea of who you're writing for, and so does Amazon in terms of putting your book in front of the right readers.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I know at least one of them, and I think they each will review the book, but they and this is something I'd love to talk to you about. They did it on Goodreads, which I'm not really that familiar with. So we'll have to talk about that. But before we get into that, I wanted to show you, they gave me permission to share the photos they took. So this is the group. They call themselves the best book club ever. And they're super wonderful ladies. And they, like I said, they read lots and lots of really fascinating books, and then they really pick them apart and talk about it. So how cool is that they picked mine?
Yeah,
and liked it. Like that was the thing. My friend, who is the one right next to me here, Cecile, her husband was like, okay, so like, how is this going to go if you read Rosa Linda's book and what are you going to say? And he was like cringing, thinking that she was just like reading my book, and he was going to have to face the fact that, like, okay, maybe it would be awkward because she would not like my book and my book wasn't very good. And she said, no, actually her book's really good. It's well written. Like I could tell that she was surprised after reading War and Peace, and I forget some of the wonderful titles she told me, but like, it was so cool that I felt validated, because it was, yes, she's my friend, but she really did think okay, this is a solid book. And then this is the other picture they took, which I thought was really great for, I need to use that for my marketing. They always have a little glass of wine or a bottle of wine, and then they have the photo of the book. But in this case, they're like, well, we need you in it because you're here with us. So that was really fun.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my experience. Some of the things that surprised me about, like, just having someone who knew who read the book and didn't know my characters. Like, some of the questions, first of all, they were like, they loved or hated the villain. They're like, we couldn't stand him. And I'm like, yes, that was the idea. They gave me a hard time about one of the characters who got killed because it's a conspiracy thriller. So one of the characters got killed, and they're like, how could you do that? How could you take out this character that I loved? But more of the questions and thoughts were like asking about different themes. I throughout my book, there's kind of I call it the woo-woo factor, where there's some like otherworldly stuff that happens with the main character and guardian angels and stuff like that. And so they asked some really fun questions, got me thinking. I think it was really timely and good for me because I'm actively working on the next series. And so hearing them ask questions, which, by the way, some of the things they asked, they're like, oh, you left this one thing hanging, and I really would have liked that resolved. And I said, well, that's because you only read book 1. There's 5 books in this series, so all of that gets resolved as you go through the series. So that was really fun, because then I felt like, okay, I'm glad that I wrote the series the way that I did. Talking to them validated for me that I did check off the right boxes by the end of the series. Because, sometimes you wonder, like, did I leave them hanging? So that was really fun to kind of feel like, oh, that's because, just wait till you read the next one and the next one. And that was fun. The other thing, what was I going to say? There was something else that stood out for me. But anyway, overall, I woke up very energized today and realizing, okay, I want to do this more. I really enjoy the chance to talk to people in person. It's why I love those author conferences, because you get to not just to talk about my books, but just the process of talking about literature, talking about writing, talking about, just what the process was really fun.
Yeah,
have you done that before?
Sorry?
Have you done that? Have you ever had people have you over for, like, talking about your books?
Yeah. There's a couple of book clubs here, and that I belong to. I don't really go that often, but they featured the Eagle Feather in one, and Shannon in one, kind of a local authors kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, Germans like to read, so it's pretty. It's a couple of English book clubs here, actually.
That's awesome. That's so fun. Yeah,
it's great. It's a great feeling. Like it's one of these things, Rosa Linda, where I know we talked about reviews and, like, nasty people and stuff. I mean, well, negative reviews don't have to be nasty, but sometimes they can be. But I always think it's asymmetric. Like when someone truly says something kind or gets your book, I think that means more. At least it resonates more with me than, like, somebody who didn't read the book or didn't get the book or just left a nasty 1-star review. So.
Yeah, and I think that's why this had so much impact on me, because 3 of the women didn't know me at all. It wasn't like, I appreciate my friends and family so much that have taken the time to read my books, but they're not necessarily always the my target audience. They're not necessarily. They read it because they love me, right? And I know that. And so it's not that I take what they say with a grain of salt, because it means a lot to me, but it lands differently when you have someone who you don't know reading your book and asking thoughtful questions. And the fact that I know that they read so much. I mean, they read a book a month minimum. It really helps me to think about some of the things I want to do in the next series. And as I'm writing, some of their questions stood out for me, and I'm going to now apply that or the concerns or at least address them as I'm writing my next series. So yeah, it just landed differently because I knew they didn't know me before they read my book.
Yeah, well, that's exciting because, I mean, ultimately, to be a successful author, lots of people you don't know and will likely never meet across the world and across time will have to buy, like, and read your books, right? So that's the way it works.
Yeah, so that was good. And the other thing from that, it was kind of funny because this morning I had breakfast with my daughter and husband, and I was still energized from last night's meeting. And I said, I had this epiphany that I just really like to talk and I'm really good at it. And my daughter started laughing and she said, oh, go figure, like someone who is the main anchor in Monterey, California, and worked for a living talking would be good at it. I was like, okay, point taken. But it was just realized like I do need to do more of this for my marketing because I'm a good public speaker. There's a lot of groups that would enjoy having me speaking, at their event or whatever. But I don't know. It's funny. My brain works like that. Like I'm so into my writing and raising my kids that I hadn't really thought of it that way. And last night I was like, okay, I need to double down on this.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a knuckle dragger who writes gunfights, but I was like, the chance to work on a podcast with, Lois Lane, reporter lady. Of course, yeah. I mean, like, who wouldn't jump at that? So I want to say, like, duh. That's obvious, right?
That's what I kind of felt like. My daughter was like, duh. Like, I don't understand. Anyway, well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. Yeah, it's been an interesting time because we're coming out of summer. There's the schedules have been so different when you're home with your kids and still trying to be productive. And I know you work a full-time job, but like for me, I started to kind of get to the like, okay, I am still writing every day, but it didn't feel like I was back in the groove yet. I wasn't quite stepping into my author, because now the next phase, I've got this 5-book series. The next phase is I really have to start stepping into the marketing part, which I know you've been really working on very hard and learning from some amazing mentors. And I realized last week when we had our show, when we talked to Danny, I was like, wow, I felt like I said this, like there's a fast train that's moving and I'm not on it. And I feel like I'm never going to catch up. And last night reminded me that, okay, I'm not that far off the train. I'm going to be okay. And it just felt like, yeah, we're going to be okay with this author thing.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a fast train, but these are things like you've already done something that 99% of people don't do, which is write a book. And you've written, 6 books now, right? So that puts you that is the biggest barrier for 99% of people. Then what you start finding is once you have the books, it's like what we talked about. It's like, okay, you've got this beautiful, wonderful story that these ladies you didn't know personally that well all like and, we're into. But that if you don't market it and you don't have a big publisher behind you, like we said, it's like going to the Library of Congress, finding a random shelf and putting your beautiful book in there and hoping the world discovers it, right? It could happen, but...
Such a good analogy, Aash, because really think about what's out there and how are they going to find it unless you tell them?
So, depending on your perspective, because a lot of writers think of themselves as artists and don't like the business aspect of it. I actually like both. It could either be like the new skill set or the dirty, revelation is once you have a certain critical mass of books, 80% of it's marketing if you want to do this for a living, right? And if you can, there's different ways to do it. A lot of people have done it different ways, but you got to figure out a way for the world to discover that book in the Library of Congress, or it's going to take a long time, if ever.
Yeah, and I really like the business side of it too. I actually think that's what attracted me to you as someone when I met you at 20 books to 50K in November of 2023. The way you and your circle of friends talk about being authors, because back then, as you'll recall, for me, writing and writing a book, which I had written a screenplay, several screenplays, but I had done that part, kind of like, and I've described this before, but I was like Gollum with the precious, ring, hiding it away from humanity where no one could see it, right? And then when I met you guys, because I had been doing business for my broadcasting, I had taught podcasting and live streaming and that kind of thing for years, but it was when it came to my author thing, I never considered it as a business until I met you guys. And once I did, it really shifted for me. And it takes a while because I'm still learning that, to get the guts up to say, yes, I do this. This is my business, that kind of thing. But it's such a freeing thing if you can make that leap. And I invite people who are maybe stuck in the Gollum phase to really think about it as, this is a business. It is your art, but your art, in a box, which is exactly what mine was, and a tote in the garage, that doesn't serve humanity, and it doesn't allow you to grow. But if you can look at it as a business, take a little bit of that emotional, it's still going to be emotional because we're human, and it's something that comes from us. I mean, it's kind of like my children come from me no matter what. If somebody says they're ugly, it's going to bother me. But realistically, like my books, yes, they are my children too. And it's a business, it's a product. It's something that if I can look at it more like that, it really shifts how I approach it. And I'm still learning how to approach it that way. So, yeah.
Well, yes, Rosa Linda, but the interesting thing, I mean, everybody has their perspective, right? But, I would bet that a lot of people would say, well, you were a television news anchor in front of millions of people on TV. Like, that's pretty daunting. I mean, if you could do that successfully, I mean, it's not easy to write books, but I would think, like, the success you had there and that level of confidence is confidence if it's earned, and that was earned, right? So it should, at least the way I look at the world, transfer over, right, to a new skill set, right? Which this is a slightly different skill set, yeah. But if we flipped the script, all these successful author friends that we have, and you told them, okay, I'm going to put you on the nightly news and you're going to anchor it for an hour in front of millions of people, you might get a very interesting reaction out of lots of them, because a lot of writers tend to be a lot more introverted than that.
Yeah. Right? It's funny. I never thought of it that way, Aash, but you're so right. It's really interesting because to me that literally, if the nightly news called me today and said, we need you right now, I would be able to do that. And of course I'd be nervous, but I would do it. And I think it would be somewhat functional. But yeah, I never actually thought of it that way. So kind of like you said, and my daughter said, like, duh. And maybe this is the point, right? Like, what is it that you are uniquely special at, or that you're kind of the magic that we bring, because one of the things that you're really good at is you can see the greatness in other people, and you look at our circle of friends that are now my circle of friends too. You can see how the unique things that they're doing that are really moving the needle. And you then integrate that into your own workflow. Not a lot of people do that, by the way, Aash. Like they see it and they're like, oh, that's cool. I wish I could do that. But you actually say to yourself, okay, how can I integrate that into what I'm doing?
Well, it's two thoughts on that. Well, one, thank you, but two, it's kind of a function of my background too. Like as a derivatives portfolio manager, you're trying to buy and sell securities at good levels, and you're competing with the market. And the faster you can make the right decision, I mean, if you're right 52% of the time, you'll be successful. But if you can make it in 4 steps instead of 10, you'll have an advantage. And so what I've basically been trying, like my job basically over the past couple of decades, is looking at something and seeing its strengths and weaknesses right away, and assessing it really quickly relative to the other opportunities, right? Yeah. And people are different. People are much more complex and much more important. But you can kind of, when you talk, everybody has something that they're really good at, right? Like if we have time, we'll talk about this zeitgeist segment later on that Pip Skinner put me onto. She's like, I don't agree with everything these guys say, but they have interesting points for authors. I'm like, okay. But back to your earlier point about, once again, I'm guessing here because I've never been a television news anchor, but this is more personal because, you are giving of yourself but you're reporting the news, right? I think if you're doing it right, not putting your own opinions and biases in,
right.
But with your books, you are putting your heart and soul out there for the world to enjoy, take shots at, tear down. Like it's more personal, I would think, than reporting the news,
And for me, it took a lot of, it was a huge leap. The moment that I decided that I gave myself permission to make stuff up and tell the story as, the characters were in my brain, because everything, even my nonfiction, the only book I had published before I met you was a nonfiction book. And that was just like my reporting, saying, this is what happened. Here's our story about living on the boat. Here are the the moments that were real and factual and happened. Then taking it to the fiction side and giving myself permission to not just make stuff up, but because mine's fact-based fiction, just like yours is, where it's, in mostly in the real world, that leap is that I think is what was holding me back from wanting, I know my books felt my books were good. And part of me is the little girl in me is am I going to get in trouble for telling stories that aren't true? And the reporter in me was so used to telling only facts that it was a shift for me. So last night was good for me because they liked my writing. They liked the story. They liked the characters. They pointed out a few things that I thought was awesome that I could have improved. And that helps me. I always like when people actually tell me the truth. I hate don't you hate that when they're like, oh yes, it's great. We love you. Everything's great. I don't hate that everyone likes to be praised, but in terms of what can really help me, I'd rather have, instead of a 5-star review, just a star, but no data, I would rather have that 4-star, not that I want 4 stars, but if I had a 4-star review with a thoughtful breakdown of what they didn't like, then I can weigh whether I want to change that in my next book.
Yeah. And I agree 100%. Here's something that I kind of just did, and it turned out to be useful, is so, if you have beta readers, right, that are like I said, my criteria for beta readers. You're one of my beta readers, right? You can't be one of my beta readers unless there's someone I'd leave my kid alone with, period. Right? Yeah. That's a high bar. There aren't a ton of people like that. So I have 6 beta readers. 3 men, 3 women. They're all friends and family. Some of them are my genre, some of them aren't. But I actually read research that said you actually don't need much more than that, 5 or 6, because if you only have 1 or 2, well, that's not enough of a sample size to give you, feedback on your, not on grammar and punctuation, but just on the story, right?
Yeah.
But if you have 10 or 15, that's too much because they're all going to disagree, and you might end up fixing stuff that's good. That doesn't need to be changed, right? So the perfect number, I think, is the ballpark of, the outside advice that you want to take. And for me, it's for people that I trust. I think it's about 5 or 6.
Yeah. And you actually just reminded me of the point that I was thinking of something that they said last night that I wanted to bring up. I have a friend who was one of my beta readers and did a review, gave me a 4-star review, and said that the thing that lost me a star, they loved the book, everything was great, but because they don't speak Spanish, they didn't like, they felt like because there was Spanish in the book, they didn't they took away a star. Fine. I wondered last night when I talked with these ladies, was that off-putting for you? Was that an issue? And they, to a person, there's 4 of them, but they were like, absolutely not. Like everything, because the way that I write it, and you read my book, so like if the person spoke Spanish, someone else explained what was said, or within the context of that sentence, it becomes clear what the person said. And so it was a way for me to, because sometimes you get hung up on that one thing that is like, oh, maybe I should change my whole style of writing because of that one comment. But having a little bit wider sample of opinions on it made me realize people, they were like, actually, in the Spanish, it was exactly what we needed, and they didn't speak Spanish, so like it worked for them. But what I found the interesting critique was sometimes I make like kind of pop culture references. Like there's this whole scene where I reference Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the quote, "I crossed oceans of time to find you," from that. So we talked about that, and they said, if anything, sometimes I over-explain the pop culture references, and they are like, it's not necessary, because if you know, and you feel like it's the insider little nugget, like an Easter egg that you got. So that was interesting. So my point is, like, it was good for me to hear a different perspective than only the review that was posted.
Absolutely. Two thoughts on that. Thought one, the fact that they get your references without you having to go into great detail means they're your target audience, your target demographic, target age, you know what I mean? These are the people you're writing your books for, which is good to know, right? I think you have an idea of that anyway, right? But that's just confirmation, which is always good. It's like, field goal kickers wouldn't know if they're any good if they didn't get to see the ball go through the uprights, because they're supposed to keep their head down when they kick the ball, right? But and the other thing is democracy wins, right? Like the one lady says she didn't care for the Spanish. That's fine, but like I would potentially disregard that regardless. But the other thing is, but if 2 or 3 of your trusted beta readers, like when I first wrote the Eagle Feather, there's a scene where Brett, one of the young Auroch warriors, goes on this super dangerous reconnaissance mission. And originally I wrote it such that, okay, they're prepping him for the mission, and then when he gets back safely, right? Because I was like, it's going to be daunting to write this chapter. And like, Danny, you know my beta readers, and a bunch of other people are like, Aash, no, we actually want to write the super dangerous, mission that he went on. Like, describe it. Tell us what it was like from his perspective, right? So, I mean, if 3 of my 6 beta readers are asking for something, well, then I got to change that, right? So
yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I guess, and it's funny because I think, and this makes me realize that the idea of beta readers, which I took your advice early on because I knew that about your beta readers. So mine are the same. I want to say 5. It has changed through the series. Different people have read as beta readers. But I think that within the industry, a lot of times people get beta readers that they don't know or have no, like it's almost too, anonymous isn't the right word, but it's too far removed from you to really, and to them, it's only a book. Whereas having that personal interaction and being able to have somebody who, yes, they know you, they're going to give you real feedback. They're honest, because that's the other thing is you don't really need like, oh, it's great, it's awesome, everything's great. Like that's nice, but beta readers, you do need them to say in that case, no, we really want to have you flesh that out, and not just blowing smoke and telling you how great everything is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's for me, that's why they're all friends and family, right? And I ask them, like, if something's bad, tell me, right? Because I'd rather, I'd much rather fix it now than have it go into print and be like a plot hole or something kind of glaring or something like that. So, yeah, because that's a problem. Like, it's hard to edit your own stuff because it so well, you live it and breathe it, and it's hard. It's very easy to miss something in your story. There's techniques, right? Like what we learned in Ireland with Tony Lee, who said, actually write your book backwards, right? Like that'll keep you from like plot holes and stuff, and make you look like a genius if you do it right. Because you can set stuff
but
up.
Man, that's so challenging, isn't it?
It is. I haven't been able to do it yet.
I can't imagine doing it. Yeah, that's so.
Yeah, but a good set of beta readers, and that's the other thing too is like. A lot of people go the other way, and whatever works. Your mileage may vary. A lot of folks have like ARC readers where they have like 500 people. They just give the copy of their book for free, and ask for. I'd be wary of that. Like I it might take me a little longer to get reviews, but I just send it out to my 5 or 6 beta readers, and then I publish it, and then the series are mature enough.
Yeah. I think that makes sense too, because honestly, when I get something free, I value it a little less. And even if I if I know it's valuable, it's hard to, you just see it a little differently. And if there are people who are just wanting free book, I'm not saying you can't give away free books sometimes. That's not the point. But if you're asking them for honest feedback, if they're just getting it for free, you don't know if they're reviewing it just for that or they actually loved the book, and I'd rather have that. I'd rather have the authentic reviews, even if they're slow coming. No, that's definitely true. And Amazon's kind of changed its policy. Like they scrutinize reviews a lot more than they did in the past, right? Because their paranoia about manipulation and all that kind of stuff. So it seems to work. The handful of beta readers. That's great. So I know we were going to talk about the another subject that we were toying with for this episode, and you touched on it briefly, is the idea of the zeitgeist. We could either talk about it a little bit now or dig into it next week. It's up to you.
Yeah, we could. It's interesting. We can mention it. It's an ambitious thing to talk about because, at least in my opinion, it's a little presumptuous. Right. We all have, and basically we define it as kind of like signs of the times or features of the time, which obviously if you're writing books to resonate with an audience, you want to be aware of it. So, there are folks out there who try to, give their read, but it's obviously very biased. Right. But for example, though, like there are some things that may be applicable to authors. And we can even talk about superheroes because we don't necessarily, I don't think either one of us, we don't write superheroes. You write mystery thrillers and I write historical fiction. But, one of the things that people mentioned on this podcast about zeitgeist was knowing your audience and knowing, where their head is at in terms of like how their experience could be different from yours. Like people over 40, may, remember more of like a Superman or a White Knight or a White Hat, like, the not perfect, but goody two shoes kind of massively successful, larger than life hero. Right. Whereas, younger people, in the age of social media where, everything's doubted and facts and then there's, a lot of distrust and stuff. They may think, oh, that's unrealistic. Nobody's that. There are no Clark Kents, there are no Supermans, Captain Americas out there. Everybody's a flawed hero. So maybe something like an Iron Man is a character that they would. But whereas, the older generation's like, no, there are actual heroes. And I don't want to read about flawed heroes. I want to read about real heroes that are more, they're inspirational to me, right? So it kind of depends on, knowing kind of the zeitgeist of the time. And one of the things that, I mentioned, so the book I'm going to publish here in a few weeks, which is the fourth Shannon Dumas book, is set in 1874 New Orleans amidst some really dramatic and crazy stuff going on in New Orleans in the wake of the Civil War. And in the preface, I referenced Martin Luther King because I had a conversation with my little boy about him, and I was trying to, basically he asked me who Martin Luther King was, and I tried to give him a halfway decent answer. And then I kind of realized in talking to young people that, my perception of what Martin Luther King was is dramatically different than a 20-year-old these days, right? Because I just think I know nobody's perfect, but I think he was a great man. And by a great man, I'm not saying he was perfect. My definition of a great man or woman is someone who does something great for humanity, right? And so I think, obviously the civil rights movement nonviolently and getting, working for equality is just a wonderfully, American, admirable, heroic thing to do. And so I admire Martin Luther King, and that's kind of, that's what the way my dad taught me. That's what I read growing up, and that's what I think of him. But these days, more facts have come out, and some people, they're disputed, but some people believe that, in his personal life, he had failings, and depending on what you believe or what, some of the stuff is, not pretty. So, if you're writing for a younger audience, they might not agree with that at all, right? Like, so it just reminded me that my perspective and my audience's perspective, I assume they're one and the same. Not necessarily, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that the tendency, and this actually came up for me last night, because, I wrote Death Wound, my first book in the series, 25 years ago as a screenplay. And they started asking me a couple questions, and about which kind of had a little bit of, because then I converted it into a novel, 25 years later, starting in 2024 is when I started making that conversion. And the ladies were asking me about certain points in the story, and I realized it's because I wrote it 25 years ago when I was 25 years younger than I am now. And so my sensibility was different when I first wrote this story than it is now. So you tend to write as you are and who you are and at that moment in time. So it's very different now than it was 25 years ago. So to your point, our kids' generation, they are growing up in a different world than we grew up in. And then we grew up in a different world than our parents grew up in. And so, yeah, I guess this goes back to you saying you really need to know your audience. You need to know who you're writing for.
Yeah, it is. And at least for me in historical fiction, it's particularly challenging because, like, if you watch some contemporary shows, the Yellowstone Western series was really good, and they had a prequel or a sequel. And there's a scene in, I think, 1865 Dallas where there's a bar, and an African American guy walks in, orders a drink, and is drinking with everybody. Like, I'm sorry, the world wasn't like that back then. Like, he couldn't have gotten in the bar. They wouldn't have served him. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm just trying to be historically accurate. Like, that's just not the way it was. Right. So you have to be kind of aware of that when you're writing these stories. And that's the thing, too, is like, the language people used and what was socially acceptable then is very different from our times. Right. So that's the question is, do you write? I just default to whatever I think is authentic. I'm not trying to offend people, but I write the way it was from everything I've researched. And,
And I liked what you said earlier, that you also write for the world you want to see, right? So in terms of the characters and the character that I think ultimately wins out as the hero or the main character in your story, the characteristics and the like moral character of your character, you do write for the world that you want to see. And they are moving through, because you're writing historical fiction, they're writing through a world. I mean, they're living through a world and you're writing about them through a world that didn't necessarily match that all the time, right? I mean, the time was different.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of you want your characters to be balanced and believable and human as opposed to caricatures, but you also like, you know, a bit of a teaser, like the backdrop for this story was an event that, you know, after reading decades of history, American history, I had no idea this happened until I started researching this book. The White League, which is a Ku Klux Klan type racist organization, except it was a political party, actually led an insurrection with 3,000 people and took over the city of New Orleans from the federal government for a period of 3 or 4 days in 1874. Wow. Like they took over the city. Like the Ku Klux, they're not the Klan, they're a different organization, but similar, right? Imagine that. Like I'm not talking about like some random, you know, lynching at night, which is horrible enough, but like they took over the whole city. They overwhelmed the police, the mayor's office, they seized City Hall and were in control of the city.
Wow.
New Orleans, right?
I did not know that either.
Well, that's the background for the story, right? So, and you have people fighting against that and everything, and obviously, you know, but like that really happened. And I don't think, you know, ultimately the main goal is to tell an entertaining story. I'm not a historian, I'm a storyteller of historical fiction. But if you believe that, you know, a story can help, you know, teach things or pass lessons on or give people food for thought or reflect upon, well, you got to be realistic. They did actually take over New Orleans.
Yeah, this is actually, I know it's a sensitive subject, but this is actually something I've thought about a lot with the changes in the world. And, you know, you'll have a situation where there might be a statue of someone who is now, you know, the truth that comes out and they see that this person was more of a villain than the hero that they were made out to be. And then they just like demolish the statue. For me, I find that to be a very lost opportunity, because we can't learn, like just pretending like things didn't happen or you just bulldoze over something. You miss an opportunity to educate and learn and grow and not repeat history, right? And so I know there's been much said about this, and I'm sure you run into that a lot as you're researching for your books. But I personally would rather learn from that situation, and then I'm able to make my own decision. So maybe instead of knocking it down, you know, alter it with a plaque or with a educational thing that helps you learn about, you know, what happened.
It's definitely, you know, a challenge, and especially with the Civil War in that era. And it leads to a fascinating conundrum, right? Because I have a character in that book who's talking to his grandson, and he is a retired U.S. naval officer. And just on the cusp of the war, he's offered command of the Confederate Navy defending New Orleans. And at the same time, the Union is trying to get him to come back and lead the Union Navy against New Orleans, right? And so his grandson's like, well, if you're so, you know, you've told me you're anti-slavery and everything, why are we still here? Why are we in New Orleans? And he's like, well, that's a really good question. And maybe if I was a better man, we wouldn't be. And his grandson calls him. I was like, no, you're like the best man I know. Tell me why. And he's like, this is my home. He's like, I took a vow to the U.S. Constitution. I'm not going to violate that. But if I go lead the Union Navy, then if we attack New Orleans, I'm firing cannons at my city, at my neighbors, at my family. Like that church there is where I proposed to your grandmother. Like I can't fight against my home and family, so I choose to be neutral. Right. So it kind of shows you. It kind of shows you, you know, that. And on the flip side, I mean, history is actually more fascinating than fiction. He's not very popular or very well known, but one of the best Union generals in the war was from Virginia. and he made the decision that he would remain loyal to the Union and served on the Union side and was very effective. And he lost everything. After the war, he was completely ostracized by all of his family and friends in the South for honoring his oath to the U.S. Army and fighting for the North. Right. So I don't know, how do you balance those things, right? So
well, and that's the beauty of so it's not just that, and you're such a great writer, and your readers who love that genre are going to be so happy to have that. But it's also what we like so it's good for the readers to have this and have us stretch in these ways, but it's also really good for ourselves, because we really, as we're raising our own families and thinking about how we move through the world, I feel like as an author, I get to explore the things that maybe I hadn't quite put into such tangible thoughts, but through my characters, I get to kind of explore that and put art into the world. So, which brings us back to why it is so hard, or why it has been so hard for me to step into that and start public speaking and start saying, it's different than, I went down to the local murder scene and covered it factually. It's definitely more personal, because it's the journey of our characters, but it's our journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way to articulate it. Because there's no way you read all 6 of your books and not know pretty well who you are. Right.
Yeah, right. That's true. For better or worse, you'll learn.
But that's the thing. That's why it's so personal. Because if someone reads my 5 eagle feather or 4 eagle feather books, and they hate it, gosh, they hate me, right? Which is fine. But it's personal, right? No matter what you say, it is for me at least.
Well, these are good subjects. I could talk all day, but I'm going to go enjoy the last day I have with my daughter before she goes to college. So I really appreciated this one, Aash. Thanks for diving once again into our conversations. I love them.
Yeah, this was good. This was a good show.
Awesome. All right, everyone. We do this every Thursday, 9 a.m. Mountain Time, and that's 5 p.m. in Central Europe. So come join us. And if you do join us live, you can even put comments in the comment section. We'll see them live in the studio, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you as well. If not, you're watching this on the replay, just put a comment in there and we'll talk about it next week. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I'm Rosa Linda Roman with AK Vias, and this is Friends and Authors Live. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.